And so I'd like to give Miriam Luke the floor to share managing your coach. Miriam, of course, and probably won't introduce herself, but Miriam is a three-time Olympian, an Olympic silver medalist, and of course now works very extensively with some of the very large organisations in the UK with around organisational development with a company called Get Feedback. So Miriam, over to you.
Okay, thanks ever so much. So managing your coach, I'm just going to share my screen, everybody, so that you can see my PowerPoint. Hopefully everyone can see that. All right, so as Gwyn said, I'm an Olympic medalist. I'm also a world champion in rowing. When we start to draw the parallels, perhaps between volleyball and rowing, what I would say is we're both team sports, and therefore the importance of the coach is incredibly valuable. And the relationship between the athletes and the coach and understanding that relationship and the responsibilities is also really important. So this is myself and Gwyn and our other two Scottish counterparts winning Britain's first rowing medal at the Olympics in Sydney a few hundred years ago. What I'd like to say is behind every successful team lies a visionary coach whose strategies, so what is their vision, what's their plan, their training methods, and also their leadership mold raw talent into champions. So the role that the coach has to play is incredibly important. And quite often, particularly when you look at rowing, you'll see performance and success happening where you've got really, really good coaches. So getting the best out of your coach as an athlete is incredibly important. This picture is of my coach, Bill Mason, who coached us to go to the Olympics in 1996. This is where we'd just broken the world record and qualified our boat for the games. Very difficult. We built the team from scratch within 2 years. So to build that team to qualify for the games and to break the world record was incredible. And I would say I've been coached by several different coaches over my career. There isn't the world's most perfect coach. They don't exist. So how do you understand what your needs are as an athlete versus what your coach's needs are and what they bring to the table? So I've broken this down into thinking about understanding your coach. What's your need as an athlete? And then what is their coaching approach? How can you then motivate them? And then how can you manage them? And, you know, understanding both of those is really key because it's a two-way relationship. So going back to my experience, what did I need from my coach? And that really aligns with athlete development. And many of you may be aware of long-term athlete development, but looking at how an athlete grows from a beginner. So Ben talked about how he was learning and his coach when he was learning. I'm sure you knew very little, Ben. You did it for fun. You really enjoyed it. There was a social element and you were learning a lot. So that relationship right at the beginning of an athlete's career path is really very much dependent on what that coach knows, but they're creating an environment where it's fun, it's sociable, and you're learning. You're getting a lot of input from your coach. You know very little about the sport. They know a lot. As you progress, perhaps up to club level, you know a bit more. I knew a bit more when I transferred from my university where I knew nothing about the sport, all the way through to training at a club. The training level got more. We started to do more miles. I was still learning a lot. My coach knew, I respected my coach. They knew a huge amount, and we were starting to compete at a higher level. And it was then that I started to think, actually, are there at times that I'm seeing cracks in my coaches? When we don't go well, when we don't do well, how frustrated they become, how there are days when they're a better coach and days when they're not so good a coach. So you start to see the vulnerabilities around your coach. And when I moved on to national level, so competing at a national level, my knowledge had increased. I had a lot more technical knowledge about my sport. My expectation of what I wanted from my coach became higher. There was more pressure on us to perform, both by us, but also by people around us, and also by our coach. But I was always still learning. And you could see there again, the world's most perfect coach didn't seem to exist. There were things that my coach at my club that I was competing at a national level, he knew a lot. In fact, he'd actually competed and coached at the Olympics himself. But you could see there were things around our training program that perhaps were lacking. We were doing a lot of weights. We weren't doing as much mileage. Other people talked about what you should be doing versus what he was doing. And doubts started to creep in about how good your coach was. And it's then that I moved on to international level, where I had a lot more experience. I was still learning. My expectation was much more elevated. My commitment was full on there because I wanted to compete for GB. I wanted to compete at a world championship level. There was a lot more risk involved. I'd given up my career. I was working to pay for my sport. And then finally, as you move into being a master's, I competed as a master's as well. I'm very experienced. I have a lot of experience in many different areas, perhaps not how to compete as a master. My self-involvement is huge. I have a lot more independence, and therefore what I want from my coach is very different. So you can see what you're looking for from your coach evolves over time. And particularly when you get up to this international level, there is a huge difference in sometimes what your expectation is for the world's most perfect coach and what your coach can deliver for you. So it's how do you get the best out of that person who is your coach? And it's understanding what their coaching approach is. I've got some pictures here. This was my first coach. I learned to row at Southampton University. My coach was very knowledgeable. He'd coached for many years. He knew a lot about technique. He knew about racing. He knew about selection. And he very much was a father figure for me. He was my nurturing coach. I didn't question him that much because he knew so much more than I did. My second coach, this is my club and national coach. He had coached at the Olympics. He was very much a taskmaster. We would do miles and miles on the water. He really was a driver coach. He made us train a lot harder, and with that training, we saw a lot of success. But as I said, some of his training program, other people talked about it not being perfect. So it was when I moved on to national level that I had a much higher expectation of my coach. My coach here, Bill Mason, he was a very technical coach. He liked his crews to be happy, having a crew, a team that got on well, that functioned well. He worked closely with us, and I knew a lot more. So there became more of a partnership between me and my coach. And you can see here we had a really, really good relationship. This was a great day. That was the best we ever performed as this crew. And he would ask me about what I thought. So it was at this point when I started to progress to international level that there became more of a partnership. He would ask me a bit about what I thought, how I was thinking about things. So different coaches have different styles. They have different strengths. They are human. They coach much better when they're happy, just as we perform as athletes much better when we're happy. Different personalities have different focuses in how they coach. So as an athlete, you want to help them to perform and play to their strengths. And you can do that by understanding them. So these are some of the coaches that I had over my international career, which spanned 10 years competing for Great Britain at 3 Olympics. I talked about Billy, who was my first proper international coach. Very technical, very motivational, very human, very team focused, got us to focus together as a team. My next coach, this is Jürgen Grobler. He coached Steve Redgrave, you may have heard of, to many of his gold medals. He coached the British team in rowing to gold medals. He won a gold medal at every Olympics that he coached at, all the way through the 90s and the 2000s, all the way through till he retired in 2022. He was a very process coach, very, very analytical, was very science-based. He was incredibly well organized. He ran a system, and it was tough. It was really hard. But what he wasn't so good at is he wasn't so good at the technical aspects of the sport. Many of his crews were very, very fit. They were very, very good at racing. They had very, very good ergometer scores, but some of them weren't as technical. So it was understanding what his strengths were, playing to his strengths. But with the technical side, we needed to look after some of that ourselves. We did actually get a second coach in to help us that brought that technical element, and Jürgen helped us to facilitate that. And then this is Mike Spracklen, who coached us to our Olympic silver medal in Sydney. He was a real mental coach. He really believed in being competitive, training side by side, pushing you every single session. And he really drove his crews to perform, to race hard, to train hard. If you didn't turn up for training, you'd get the phone call, "Why aren't you here?" Even when you're ill, you had to convince him that you were ill. But again, with Mike, there were things that he wasn't good at. He was really rubbish at knowing what time we had to be at the venue to go to the start to race. He would never know our race times. He didn't know what times the buses were. Quite often he didn't even know who we were competing against. So this was an area that he wasn't so good at. And we as a team made sure that we had that information so that we made up for the things that he necessarily wasn't so good at. So that allowed him the opportunity and to play to his strengths. So understanding who your coach is and what their strengths are. Now, I've been and done a bit of research because I have been to watch volleyball. Obviously, I came to watch Ben train, and I found some volleyball coaches. I Googled top 10 coaches, and these are the three that came up. Obviously, they're all indoor volleyball. But help me here, Ben. Are you still there? We've got Bernardino from Brazil, and
Yep.
they talk about his strengths as being very, very tactical coach, lots of discipline, lots of resilience of his team, pursuit of excellence, teamwork and adaptability. Ben, or does anyone here have any experience of the coach from Brazil?
So I've competed against Brazil in the test event.
Yeah.
Obviously playing against his son, who was essentially the head coach on court, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then we had Mark Plotiger, who played for GB. He went through the Brazilian system as a junior. So yeah, everything on there. You'd say, and plenty of books as well, Miriam, if anybody's really interested to go get one of his autobiographies as well.
Oh, okay. So you can read about. What do you know that perhaps are his weaknesses, Ben?
Oh, I think there's probably like passion would maybe fly a little bit too strong. So I think if I was comparing them, you've obviously got Karcher on the bottom there. If I think of the US
Yeah.
Brazilian team, you'd maybe have that. The US would be very calculated. The Brazilians, they had that risk of over revving, which might cost them a few points. It might cost them. It made up for it in other areas, but yeah, if I was observing, it was probably always on the edge of loss of control, or in terms of like that emotive response, maybe distracting from clarity on technical points or tactical points.
And then what about Jenny Lang Ping?
Now, I don't think she has any weaknesses as far as I.
Not that you know of.
Well, no, I think it's a pretty staggering career, and it's interesting because I guess I've only ever observed her coach and seen her on the sidelines, and she's probably another step past that American, very very organized, very disciplined, and maybe lacking a bit of that. If I was watching that, maybe that kind of passion, but that you could tell how she coached was I guess in response to the players she was working with as well. So you could understand why, but again, maybe I'd be looking at it thinking you could at least celebrate once, maybe. But you've managed to catch the picture with her celebrating, Miriam. So
Yeah.
not bad. That's good effort.
Yeah. So understanding your coach, what is it that they're good at, and how do you play to their strengths? How do you get the best out of them with regards to their strengths? And then understanding what their weaknesses are. You know, if I was coached by Bernardino, probably if I was the captain of that team, it's being able to keep your head when your coach is losing their head. With regards to, you know, the US, perhaps adding a bit more passion into it and being more enthusiastic. And then obviously with Jenny, you said she hasn't got any weaknesses, but I'm sure she has. So it's thinking about how do you understand the strengths of your coach, what their weaknesses or potential derailers, so that you can work together as a team to either mitigate them, understand them when they're an issue, and get the best out of your coach, because actually coaches are people and they're motivated. They are happy when their team does well. They lose motivation, and sometimes when their team doesn't do well. So working as a team with your coach rather than putting them on a pedestal and expecting them to be able to do everything. So motivating your coach is really important. So you have to think about, as an athlete, what's in your control, because for many things you'll feel the coach has all the control and I don't have control. But however, there are a lot of things that you do have control over. Being positive, taking that learning approach with regards to when things go wrong, remaining upbeat when potentially your coach is not so upbeat or frustrated, when perhaps your coach shows emotion, keeping that level head. The other thing that a lot of coaches really like is when their athletes are proactive. So before they have to drive something, perhaps you are suggesting it. Ben, you said you asked your coach a lot about, why are we doing this? What's the point of doing it? Why are we doing this? And actually, as a coach, and I coach a lot myself now, I coach juniors at one of our local rowing clubs. When athletes come and ask me that, it shows that they're interested. It shows that rather than then they expect the coach to deliver everything, it shows that they're interested in what's being done and they want to understand why, rather than it being a challenge. So questioning and being proactive can be a really positive thing for coaches. As an athlete, buying into the team culture that the coach creates, rather than sitting on the sideline and not buying into that team culture. My daughter rows at Texas, and there's a rather good volleyball team there that continually seems to win the national championships. And again, that's really important in her team and in the Texas culture, is creating a team culture where it's not about an individual. It's about how do you make your team better today? And that is buying into the culture that you're creating with your team, but also with your coach. I think the other thing that really helps them to play to their strength is reinforcing what they're good at. So when they are building that culture, when they are reacting to, I mean, we talked about the Chinese coach talking about taking an individual approach to her different athletes and saying, I really like what you do around that. So reinforcing what they're good at, that builds their confidence, which helps them to be a better coach. But also understanding their weaknesses and thinking about what can you as a team or as an athlete do to mitigate what those limiters might be, particularly when they may impact morale and performance of the team. Also going on to, and this is another thing you talked about, Ben, which was communication. So communication is something that I see a lot of younger athletes not doing with their coaches. They're fearful of their coach. They feel about if they approach their coach that it's some way challenging for their coach. So how do you, to ask yourself, if you want to get the best out of your coach, how do you communicate with them? And is it two-way? And thinking about different coaches at different levels. So when you're working with a coach at that higher level, thinking about how do I communicate with them and make sure it's two-way. It's not me telling them something, it's having a two-way conversation with them so that they can understand potentially what my issues are and what my vision is and what I want to to achieve, but also what their vision is, what their issues are, and what their drivers are for coaching. So thinking first of all about what the best channel is to talk to them. For me, it was always face to face, but timing's important. Whether it's WhatsApp, whether it's calling them, etc. But thinking about the best channel to communicate with your coach is, and then also picking your timing. I always found straight after a session was not necessarily the best time to speak to my coach as an individual. Quite often it was perhaps when we were having a break over a cup of tea, or perhaps asking them for a one-on-one detailed conversation so that I could actually raise issues, etc. Or what if a player is fearful of their coach? And many athletes are fearful of their coach, and I think that creates a barrier to communication. What I would say is, making that approach in a formal way and asking for some time. And then that can build that channel so that you are communicating with them. Younger athletes definitely are much more fearful of coaches. Letting them know in good time when you want to have that conversation with them. 5 minutes before practice time is not a good time. Planning ahead, letting them know when you potentially have commitments so that they can plan ahead as well. We get when I was training on the national team, there were people that were like, well, I've got to go to this and I've got to go to that, or I have an appointment. It was always really difficult for them to then react at the last minute with regards to people not being there, particularly in a team sport, or being able to plan training and competition. So making sure that you're planning ahead and you're sharing your plans with your coach. Telling them last minute does not build good relationships. Having that conversation about alignment of your goals and theirs, making sure that, is everyone on the same page? I'm sure, Ben, many times you did sit down as a team and talked about what your focus is for the next 6 months, the next year, and then that how that breaks down into what our focus is with regards to this week. So making sure that as an athlete, you're understanding what that is, and making sure that your expectation with regards to what we're trying to achieve this week in this next competition is aligned with theirs. Because if they're expecting you all to win and you all think you're just going to get some practice, that alignment is not really going to create good communication and a good relationship with getting the best out of your coach. The next big thing that sits around coach-athlete relationship is around team selection. And for many, there's lots and lots of processes in place around making sure that for national teams, that criteria is set out in advance, but making sure that you understand what that criteria is, that you ask questions in advance rather than afterwards, and then being able to respect the coach's decision. You have to trust them, because at the end of the day, they need to be able to make the decision. The buck sits with them with regards to the performance of the team. So ask your questions in advance so that when you've had your team selection, then you need to respect what the coach's decision is. And understand that when you don't perform, they'll be disappointed too. So taking that learning approach, communicating, talking to your coach, both as a team and as an athlete, is really important in continuing to get the best out of your coach and being able to manage your coach. So finally, I've got 2 minutes left. It's thinking in summary, do I understand my coach? Do I understand what I want from my coach? What's important in in how I work with my coach? And then also, do I understand what their strengths are, what their derailers or limiters are, and how can we work together effectively to do what's right for the whole team? Play to their strengths, manage their weaknesses, and really make sure you communicate with them. Particularly, don't be fearful of your coach. At the end of the day, they want to do well, you want to do well, so you've got the same goal, and that's aligned. So, any questions, anybody? Go ahead, Gerda.
Hi.
Hi, Gerda.
Hello. I think I have a question. It's just fascinating, I'm just taking all in, and I think it's beautiful. Um, and it sounds great, and I wish all the people in the world that play any sport can just listen to this. I think it's just so crucial. People management probably is one of the most difficult thing in any sector of professional life, really. So yeah, as I said, I don't really have a question. I mean, it's just when it comes to younger generation. So I've been a quite, not say difficult child. I've been a difficult child, but not in a very negative way. Like I've been very distracted, and I laughed a lot. I didn't really focus much. So I think I was quite a challenging person for the coach to manage. And I've been kicked off teams many, many times, and I never really learned how to be a good player in that respect. Now, as I'm grown, I really appreciate how difficult this job is, because at times I coach juniors, kids, juniors and adults, and I can see the difference between them, the way they approach and talk to you, and the way you have to be to deliver the information, to build the relationship. It's just such difficult work. At the same time, it's amazing. The way to, well, when you are a coach, a leader, I guess you have to boost up yourself with the confidence. Sometimes this confidence is a bit fake. Like, you have to make yourself up to be in that position. You cannot be a coach who's just mumbling something under the nose, right? So you have to boost yourself, and sometimes you boost up with this fake confidence until you learn how just to be naturally confident in what you do. Maybe that also comes with the amount of knowledge you have, that comes with the time. I guess when you receive this feedback from the players, you can take this personally, and this is all about how do you take yourself outside this this personal situation and look at yourself. You know where I'm going to, right?
Yeah.
It's a tricky thing to do. So it's writing this, obviously, trying to find this right approach. And to be honest, I've had so many coaches in my life, and it's just, and yes, it is very difficult, because especially now, where I know where I'm at, what I want to be in volleyball, what I want to see maybe the performance at the end of the season, and then etc. I need to talk to my coach, and I need to deliver. This is what I want, and then when I don't like the way the coach do some things, I have to somehow deliver that information. So by now I'm learning, but I think all of these things, that it comes with confidence. When you're adult, when you know what you want, you're super clear on your goals. That happens when you're a teenager, but that it's a rarity. So when I was coaching you under 16s, I had like 20 girls, and some of them were really easygoing. They will throw your feedback, you ask that or not, and then some of the people, they may not like something and they will never tell you. So it's just finding this. It's expecting that your teams will manage you. It's a very naive thing to do. Like, you want them to manage you. Like, you want to teach them how to manage you. So, and by asking the questions like, what did I do right, or what did I wrong? It will not, if you ask 1, 2, or 3 times, and I tried, it never worked. Everybody just nodding their heads and said, I had an amazing session. And I was like, probably not, but and it's just, I think it's a consistency from the coach perspective, onto asking little tiny questions until you build that confidence in young people. And then by the end, I think they will feel more and more confident to maybe deliver more of a feedback. And then you will start feeling less, taking things less personally, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I went in tangles, but yeah, that was.
No worries.
Did you want to
Gerda.
say something, Charlie?
I have a question actually, if that's
Oh,
okay.
it's the question, because like Gerda, I was just going to answer you very quickly, which was, you know, building confidence is important. And I'm not sure if you're asking as an athlete or as a coach. But if you're thinking about confidence as a coach, again, focusing on what you're good at a coach and leveraging what your strengths are. If you don't know what your strengths are, I wouldn't necessarily ask your athletes, particularly U16 athletes. I would ask another coach to come and shadow you and watch you, or ask another coach that you work with to ask them, you know, what do you perceive my strengths as being, and focusing on leveraging what those strengths are and asking them for some feedback potentially on where your gaps are. Being a confident coach comes obviously with experience. It comes with results. And building confidence is about being decisive, communicating why you've made those decisions, and making those decisions the right decisions, and then celebrating the success of those decisions. This is how far we've come. This is what we've achieved, whether it is technical development, whether it's tactical development, whether it's strength, whether it's speed. So using those measures to help build your confidence, but the confidence of the team as well. But that's more about not managing your coach, but you as a coach being confident.
Right. I'm going to have to call us on to schedule soon. So we've got 2 questions. Could you answer those questions succinctly and briefly?
I will. Charlie, you go first. You were first.
I'll ask succinctly as well, Gwen. I want to throw the dynamic of your sphere of influence, and there's an extra dynamic here, isn't there, with the fact that you had your sister in the team for a large part of this as well. What role did you, I guess, influence in terms of your parents, guardians, and how they helped you to manage your coach?
Very little parents or guardians. I was an adult. So when I was rowing, so I learned to row at university. My parents knew nothing about rowing. We managed them. So they had no impact on our coach at all. That we managed them on how they would come to a competition and what they were allowed to do at the competition, so that they didn't get in the way. The relationship with our coach was really key to our performance, and I would say that I had very good and close relationships with my coaches. I felt it was important to be on side with your coach and both of you be fighting to do well, as opposed to not working with your coach, and to understand what they're good at and to get the best out of them. Okay,
I guess yes,
Jermaine.
Brilliant.
You're on mute, Jermaine.
Hey, thank you for that, Miriam. My question would be referring back to when you said you had a coach that was more of a kind of like father figure to yourself. I've always struggled as a player, especially when I was younger, if I had a coach that was more like a father figure or a mother figure, compared to a coach where I just thought they were really good and that technically they were amazing and they were kind of putting us through our paces. I've always struggled to perform when it comes to that father figure role. How did you ever have that issue, or did you have that issue and you were able to kind of combat against that, and how did you do that?
So my father figure coach, who taught me how to row, he actually came and coached me at my first World Championships, and we won a bronze medal. He was a very inexperienced coach, but he worked with the senior coach who was helping him. And then he coached me at my first Olympics, where we came 5th, which was actually a pretty good result. So he was my father figure coach, but he also, you know, was somebody that had a mentor that was working with him to help him be a better coach. And he talked to me always about never stop learning, Miriam. I'm a coach. I don't know everything. I want to learn more. So then as I progressed more in my career, he then became the person I'd ring up and ask advice. So he became more of that advisor coach, the person you go to and have I'm not so sure we're doing the right thing. And he'd give you a little lecture about what you needed to do. That type of father figure coach.
Brilliant. Fantastic, guys. I'm going to call this to an end. We've now lost our break, by the way. Sorry. That's okay. And just want to say massive thank you, Miriam, for taking the time. There's some really informative stuff, and there was a lot in there actually, and we might need to ask you back another time.